But first, we continue with Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Seymour Hersh, whose piece, Who's Sarin?, has just come out in the London Review of Books. We'll also find out why it didn't come out in his traditional place of publication, The New Yorker, also The Washington Post. But first, in a written statement to BuzzFeed, Sean Turner, spokesman for the Director of National Intelligence, denied the claims in Seymour Hersh's article. He wrote, quote, "We were clear with the Washington Post and Mr. Hersh that the intelligence gathered about the 21st August chemical weapons attack indicated the Assad regime, and only the Assad regime, could have been responsible. Any suggestion that there was an effort to suppress intelligence about a non-existent alternative explanation is simply false." Turner also said no American intelligence agency, quote, "assesses that the al-Nusra front has succeeded in developing a capacity to manufacture sarin." If you would respond, Seymour Hersh.
Well, what's to say? I mean, he said what he said, and I write what I did. You know what I did? You mentioned Abu Ghraib. The senior spokesman for the Pentagon at the time, when I first began to write about Abu Ghraib, said that he literally said that oh, Hersh is just throwing crap against the wall to see what sticks. I mean, a spokesman's job is to carry out what the administration wants him to say. The fact is that I think the administration should just take the high road here and put out what it knows. I have every reason to believe they know more than they've indicated about who did what and what the sarin looked like. And, you know, as I wrote in the article, here you have a president of the United States that one day is telling us he's going to bomb Syria, and the next day he suddenly cuts the deal. He's suddenly a great constitutionalist, and he's now going to go to the Congress because the War Powers Act that every president has ignored, and this president ignored when he attacked Libya, suddenly is very paramount to him. So he's going to go, he's not going to bomb, despite saying with great braggadocio how tough he's going to be. They crossed the red line, which is a very big phrase for him, and he's going to show that nobody can cross the red line and get away with it. And then he decides overnight to go to Congress, and then he accepts a very rational deal, and I'm glad he did, that the Russians put forward with the Syrians to dispose of the chemical arsenal or the chemicals that are in Syria. Why? Why the turnaround? Is it because they had no information that anybody else had anything? There's no other alternative? I mean, just what the statement you read by the press secretary or the spokesman for the National Office of National Intelligence would raise just profound questions. If you have no information that contradicts the notion that Bashar did it, why are you walking away? And so, you know, there's more to this story. I assure you, I don't have it all.
So who were the intelligence officials, the analysts who you talked to, whether you name them or not?
Oh, you got to be.
But tell us what they said to you and which agencies they were with.
I can't. Look, you know what? You can go up and down, back and forth, and raise questions about anonymous sources. But believe me, if these guys, you know, they'd all be living like Snowden in Russia for the rest of their lives if they were lucky. Nobody's going to talk for the record.
Let me turn to David Shedd, who you do quote, the Deputy Director of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency.
No, I don't quote. I quote a document that was sent to him.
But let me go directly to him, who spoke
Sure.
in July at the Aspen Security Forum about the Syrian opposition.
I count no less than 1,200 disparate groups in the opposition. And so, to a large extent, the conditions of Syria benefit those who have a tendency toward or are actually in the far extreme. Because what happens is they go for the space and organization and certainly what they view as their mission vis-a-vis the Bashar Assad regime and its proxy fighters with Hezbollah and so forth. They are the most effective end of that spectrum of those 1,200 groups. They are increasingly stronger within the opposition in their relative capabilities against the regime. That is not a statement on the flow and the ebb that pertains to how the regime is doing against the opposition. But within the opposition, I think to your question, I think the al-Nusra front is gaining in strength and is a case of serious concern for us.
That's David Shedd, the Deputy Director of U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, speaking in July. The significance of what Shedd said and what he also couldn't say, Seymour Hersh.
I don't know what he could or could not say. I can't get into his mindset. I just know that by then he'd received one major report, and also the ops order was being conducted. And Shed's been around a long time. He was in the CIA, and I haven't talked to him, and I didn't discuss this with him. But he's a fine intelligence officer, and he's reflecting on what. Look, by the time he's talking inside the community for the last year, it's been known that the only game in town, whether you like it or don't like it, was Bashar. Because otherwise, what we call the secular the opposition to Bashar, the legitimate non-radical, if you will, dissenters, people from within the army, civilians who didn't like the lack of more social progress, et cetera, they were overrun. Even we knew that beginning early in the year, we knew they were being overrun by jihadists. And so the only solution, it seems to the government at the time, the people I know, and I've talked to people about this for years, it's been more than a year of talk, is the only solution for stability was Bashar. You have to just like it or don't like it. Israel, which, don't forget, Damascus is, 45 miles from the Golan Heights and 130 miles northeast of Tel Aviv, easily within range of any missiles. The Israelis are not going to tolerate a jihadist government inside Syria, or even any area that the jihadists will claim as an area of Sharia law. They'll hit it. The only potential for stability was to keep Bashar there, or at least to get him in a position where maybe he'd be willing to negotiate some sort of collaborative government, which seems to be the only sensible theme right now. And so Shed could well have been talking just about that. The reason I wrote about it, mentioned what he said, is because he said what he said after getting a lot of very tough intelligence about al-Nusra and its capability. And I will also tell you there was a very scary incident in May in Turkey in which some al-Nusra groups were found, initially reported, to have more than 4 pounds of sarin. And they were going to use it to hit an American air base in a place called Adina. We have a big air base there, and cause some trouble there. I didn't write about it because by the time that case got to a trial, a further along indictment, the Turkish government, no longer claimed that they had sarin, but they were looking for it. And as many in the audience may not know, Erdogan, the head of the Prime Minister of Turkey, and his chief intelligence officer, a gentleman named Finan, are very pro-Islamists. And there's a lot of tension there about that in the region. So you have Turkey on one side that really wants Bashar to go down, but it's also an ally of ours, and it also tries to maintain good relationships with Iran. It's a very complicated, messy thing.
Seymour,
and the nerve gas... Go ahead, I'm sorry. No, go ahead, I'm fine.
Why did the piece appear in the London Review of Books and not in your traditional place where you publish in the New Yorker, or as it was expected to appear in the Washington Post with executive editor Marty Barron saying the sourcing in the article didn't meet the Post standards?
Well, that's what he told me, or one of his editors said in an email after the story. One had been, I thought, scheduled to run for a few weeks. He's the boss. He's a rational, good editor, and he's entitled to say it didn't meet. The information I got is that it didn't meet the standards of the Washington Post, and I respect that. He's no fool, I don't know the guy, but everything I heard about him is that he's a very competent editor. I know people that worked with him when he was at the LA Times. Which he was, and so I don't begrudge an editor to say what he wants. Look, people like me, we really wear out welcomes very quickly. Sometimes you get tired of reporters coming in and saying, the sky is always black and it's not sunny, and that's what we do. So investigative reporters, we have a very short shelf life. We're the bad news bears. Talk
about the information that came out of the documents that NSA contractor Edward Snowden released and how they bear on this, Cy.
Well, that's why I went to the Post. Snowden gave, Snowden, and by the way, the Post, you've got to admire the Post for publishing Snowden, too, a mainstream press newspaper doing it, obviously getting heat from the White House. One of the documents Snowden gave that ended up being in the Washington Post hands was sort of an annual budget request by the intelligence community. It included information about the National Security Agency, a much higher document than top secret, et cetera, et cetera. And there was a section of it. The Post ran only a dozen or two, less than that, maybe 17, 18 pages of the document. The rest they withheld at the request of the government, which is their right. But in the story, a summary story, they mentioned two things that made me think, that really woke me up. They mentioned the censor system. And I had known about the censor system from people inside. And as I mentioned earlier, it's difficult because passive censors are something that, as a journalist, I'm glad we have. Passive, nobody's hurt. We collect information that we can make judgments on.
These are run by the National Reconnaissance Office.
Yes, and the National Security Agency, too, runs a lot of them. And presumably, they're not to be tampered with, the findings. This administration tampered, is one of the points of the article in the London Review books, was that they tampered with something they shouldn't tamper with, a system that should be taken very seriously. But that article in the Washington Post mentioned the censor system, and it also mentioned something else, that from the day the opposition, the rebel war began in Syria years ago, it's been a couple of years now, we lost the ability to monitor Bashar and his senior persons. The NSA was no longer able to capture them. They changed the way they communicate. And one of the caveats about this whole notion of being able to intercept is an awful lot of stuff. We have America. We have couriers flying all day, all the time, all over the world with documents for CIA station chiefs, for ambassadors that aren't put into communication devices, so they can't be intercepted. And we lost Bashar when the rebel war began. And I don't think, I've talked to people, we still don't have him. And there's no question we would have picked up some clue if Bashar had been actively involved in ordering the nerve gas attack. And one thing the government, to its credit, has not said in this whole thing since August the 21st, this White House has never claimed to know a thing about Bashar. We use his name all the time. We say, oh, Bashar did this and that, but we've never claimed to know anything about what he did or did not say because we don't have it. And so that led me, to be honest, to the Post. And the problem was, it's not the Post problem, it's my problem. Why did I think a mainstream press paper would want to go so hard against, from a freelancer? It was silly of me. I should have just gone to the London Review very quickly. My mistake.
And why this is significant today. In the end, President Obama chose not to strike Syria because the American people just overwhelmingly said no. But what this means for what's happening in Syria today, and also why then did the Syrian...
Let me interrupt you, Amy.
Yes.
Let me interrupt you. He didn't, I'm telling you, he didn't do it because the American people said no. He knew it because he didn't have a case. And there was incredible opposition that will be one of these days written about, maybe in history books. There was incredible opposition from some very, very strong-minded, constitutionally minded people in the Pentagon. That's the real story. I don't have it. I could just tell you I know it. And so it wasn't just a case. From the military's point of view, this was a president who many respected in many ways. There's many good things about Obama. There's a lot of things that I voted for him twice. And he's probably going to be the brightest president we're ever going to have, and maybe the best president we're ever going to have. The system doesn't produce always the very best, our system. But the fact of the matter is that this president was going to go to a war because he felt he had to protect what he said about a red line. That's what it was about in the military's point of view, and that's not acceptable. You don't go to war, you don't throw missiles at a country when there's no immediate national security to the United States, and you don't even talk about it in public. That's wrong. And that was a terrible thing to do. And that's what this story is really about. It's about a president choosing to make political use of a war crime and not do the right thing. And I think that's, to me, Amy, that's a lot more important than where it was published and who told me no and who told me yes. I know the press likes to focus on that stuff, but that's not the story. The story is what he was going to do and what it says maybe about him, what it says about that office, what it says about the power, that you can create a narrative, which he did, and the mainstream press is going to carry out that narrative. I mean, it's almost impossible for some of the mainstream newspapers who have consistently supported the administration. This is after we had the WMD scandal, when everybody wanted to be on the team. It turns out our job as newspaper people not to be on the team. You know, we've got a world run by a lot of yahoos and wackos, and it's our job as reporters to do the kind of work and make it hard for the nincompoops that run the world to get away with some of the stuff we're doing. That's what we should be doing more and more of. And that's just, you know, I don't think there's any virtue in it. It's just a job we have. And there's no heroism, you know, there's nothing heroic about what we do. It's heroic for some of the reporters in Africa to do some of that work when they're at personal risk. We're not at personal risk. It's just not so hard to hold the people in office to the highest standard. And the press should be doing it more and more. So he didn't do it. And one thing, last thing, he didn't do it because of public opinion. He was willing to flout it, I think.
Seymour Hersh, I want to thank you for being with us, Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. We will link to your latest piece in the London Review of Books, headlined "Who's Sarin?" at Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for watching this report from Democracy Now!, your daily independent global grassroots news hour. We don't accept advertising or corporate funding, but rather rely on donations from viewers like you. Please make your contribution by visiting democracynow.org today. We need your support today to keep bringing you this hard-hitting, in-depth reporting.